everybody. Welcome to this session as part of the 2022 Lean in Higher Education Conference. Thank you for attending today's session, Removing Our Silos Restores Our Humanity, the special power of mapping and sharing your processes. It we run as a 45-minute learning session. My name is Catherine Harris and I'm one of the co-hosts for today's session. Before we start, as hosts, the University of Melbourne acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work and learn. We pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and the place of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. I'm working on the Wurundjeri people's land, and they are the people of the Kulin Nation. A couple of quick housekeeping issues. Please stay on mute throughout the presentation, and please keep your cameras on if you would like to, so we can see your faces through the presentation. If you have any questions, Antonio has very kindly said you can raise your hand if you'd like immediate interaction with him. Other than that, put your questions into the chat and we can deal with them at the end. Please allow me to introduce the presenter, Antonio Nava, and it's our honour to have the presentation today. Thank you so much. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction. Let me just get all my Zoom pieces in the right place. As mentioned before, if you do want to interrupt me at any point throughout, please do use the hand raise function or turn your camera on and just sort of raise your hand, and I'll try to keep an eye out for that. If you put things in the chat, I may see them at times, but because of sort of the screens and things that I have going on, I might miss it, and I don't want to miss anything really important here. So I want to start by saying I've never seen a perfect process, right? But I have felt, as I'm sure many of you have, imperfect ones. And messy processes can play a major role in things like staff attrition, lack of engagement, poor deliverables. And with so many fires, we all want things to get better. But what's the first step in process improvement? I believe it's to build a shared understanding of the process, not beginning with the hard skills we may think of like process mapping or data collection, but with our soft skills of introspection, of active listening, and of empathy. The keys for the journey in this session, in this particular session, is that I want you to think about capturing your story. I want you to think about how you listen and take in the stories of others. And I want you to think of this as the way that I would hope that you start any kind of change. With that in mind, I'll start telling you one of my stories. My first grown-up job was with a university in an administrative role. It was very procedure-driven, very methodical, right? Very clean-cut, but it was very, very siloed. It was so siloed, in fact, that the team that sat in the cubicles next to mine, they did basically the same role, but they served a different population of students. They wouldn't discuss with me how their process was different. They would just say, oh, it's different, you don't understand, there's more complexity. But I mean, I couldn't shake this feeling that it wasn't that much more complex or different. And what about like the steps before and after what I was doing? Like, it bugged me not knowing, if this piece of information came to me, where did it come from, and who validated it, and what happens after I'm done, and who do I hand it off to? And the silos made things really tense between the groups. All the groups saw the other groups as the cause for delays and dysfunctions. Now, I wasn't a business analyst. I didn't know process mapping or lean or any of that stuff. At the time, I was just an individual contributor, and I was hungry for answers. Ultimately, I decided to do something crazy, something apparently nobody had tried to do before. I had a conversation with people that were in other departments. At the time, we were in an 11-story building, and even the use of our elevators was siloed. It was interesting because the folks on the second and third floors were like looked at sideways, like, why are you being so lazy? Just take the stairs. You're on the second and third floor. So floors 4 through 8 sort of had an unspoken priority usage of most of the elevators. There was a special elevator that sped folks up to the top 3 floors, and it bypassed the first 8 floors entirely. It was interesting. Like you'd sort of have this air about you of like, ooh, you're going to floor 9, 10, or 11, right? It was this special, fancy feeling elevator, even though nothing really inherently was different about it. So To get a real conversation started, I had to do the unthinkable. I had to visit a floor that was not my familiar home of floor 3. Now, the land I had known was relatively quiet, some chatter, often about policies or transfer credits, bland color palette. The best way to describe what I experienced once I stepped out of the elevator into a new floor was culture shock. From the moment those doors opened to the 7th floor, I was flooded with this conversations and music and literal bell ringing every so often, followed by cheers. It was weird. Like even the scents, like the things that I could smell, like the pizza and the donuts, were different. It was jarring. It was like a completely different universe, a completely different university. It was at that point that something clicked in my mind. The culture shock that I was experiencing was because it really was a different culture. Right? It seemed obvious now, but for some reason it had eluded me and everyone else there. It was like saying gravity makes things fall, right? We all know it from experience. We hadn't really thought about it or what it meant for our processes, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to go back in a slide there. So I started thinking about this and thinking about culture and language and celebration rituals and hierarchy and art, all of the things that make a culture, right? Every single floor of this building had its own language, its own music, its own sounds and smells and foods. I started thinking about this as almost like cultural immersion, right? In the same way that I could take 2 semesters of Spanish class or spend 2 weeks in Mexico, right? I started to decide that I would spend time sitting with folks as they completed their work, simply to hear and observe, something I now know is doing a Gemba walk, right? I also, though, invited them to view my process and listen, hopefully, if they were open to it, to hear my experiences, what I did all day, what our shared frustrations were, how we each measured success. Now, I wasn't trying to get them to be like us or to change their ways or to judge. I was there purely to learn and share. I realized that learning a little bit more about the why of the different places and cultures, that we had just inherently become better at our roles. Like some of the things just got easier and less painful, and we started figuring things out even without doing formal process improvement. One of the things that I found was that when we started to use even specific phrases, that phrase would have a completely different meaning for another group. Now, it was mind-blowing that in this policy-focused singular space that we called our university, our language wasn't universal. Returning to my homeland, my coworkers shared that they were literally scared for my safety. They feared that I had been mauled off by angry aggressors from a far-off land. It was pretty amusing. I then returned to my quiet workspace and I'd hear folks grumble about the challenges they were having in their processes, and I began to really see how so much of that was just caused by misalignment, by the fact that assumptions were being made, by that language was misinterpreted, that was causing process waste and friction and defects. The driver for me really to learn more when it comes down to it was that it felt robotic to be siloed. I felt dispensable, disconnected from the mission. And it seemed everyone else in the workplace was just an other, a hindrance, a roadblock, another set of robots who just needed to work harder. And once we started to build those relationships and understanding these cultural differences, we started to free ourselves from an us versus them mindset, right? These were really other people who were similarly frustrated and wanted things to get better. We had regained a part of our humanity and reclaimed our identities as people doing work, not just as workers. I'll rewind the clock back a little bit in my story. It was my senior year at UC San Diego, and I participated in the class with a group called the Intergroup Relations Program. The class brought together different students from different identities and focused on creating a dialogue, right? Not a debate, not a discussion, not an argument, not a brainstorm, it was a dialogue. These were quarter-long discussions that would center around race or gender identity, for example. Now, it's important to establish what it means to be a dialogue. So in a debate, you're essentially trying to prove that you're right. In an argument, you're trying to prove essentially the other person is wrong. In a dialogue, each participant approaches the discussion with the goal of sharing their experiences to learn from the experience of the others in the group. We set ground rules during these discussions, during these dialogues, things like one person speaking at a time, practicing using I statements, practicing active listening, the soft skills that I mentioned earlier, right? But critically important were suspending judgment, listening, inquiring, and exploring assumptions. Now, these principles should be the foundation no matter what type of process improvement methodology you're going through. Because sometimes we see change in our process because it feels janky or we want to find something better. Sometimes we change because we have to. Maybe there's a policy or a legal challenge that forces us to act. But too often we do it when our hair is on fire and we jump to hasty solutions, right? When we do that without talking to each other, tension increases, those relationships suffer, and we often create new process problems and create, in turn, creating and needing more quick fixes, right? It takes some time to create a dialogue, to map your current state, to understand it, to share it. But if we do that, we're going to have a better chance of seeing real changes, not just in our process, but in the culture and in the value of being at work, being with each other. Now, there's many methodologies. I'm sure we've seen many of them, and we're here to talk about and celebrate lean. Yeah. So a bit about what I currently do is I teach Lean Six Sigma here at UC San Diego. I teach up through the yellow belt, and we have a white belt video posted, and we have scholarships for green belts and things like that. So I use these in addition to teaching them. I also have, I've used them in my projects. Now, I don't know if the folks in this conference are like masters in lean or just kind of dipping their toes in. But I do want to make sure that we all have the same foundational setting. So I apologize if what I'm about to go through is overly familiar to some, but maybe we can find this as an opportunity to share our excitement with it. So here's what I'm going to do is as I go through the next few slides, if you want to do the little heart reactions or the little thumbs up to whatever thing that you resonate with or that you use a lot or that you want to cheer on, go for it. If you see something and you want to put in the chat, add additional flair or flavor or context to it, please do so. So I want to invite you for the next little bit to do that because some of you may be lean champions yourselves. So to those who are perhaps less familiar, Lean Six Sigma follows the sort of belt system similar to karate. There's white belt for introductory, there's yellow belt, we've got some practice, green belt and black belt, you apply them to projects, and you've got masters and beyond, right? So the central sort of ideas here are everything we do is a process. No process is perfect. Don't jump to improve. Build quality into the process and focusing on value add. I'll go into each of these a little bit. I see Catherine, thank you for the little heart there. Everything we do is a process, right? This tool set can be applied to everything that happens. So while it has its roots in manufacturing, all of us in higher ed now have seen, and in health in our different campuses, that it's not just factory-driven processes, right? These can be applied to literally anything we do because everything we do is a process. And sometimes we meet with a team and they say, oh, that maybe works for them over there, but it's not going to work for our process because we're snowflakes. I really want to boil it down and show that even if you're talking about doing a grocery run or doing your laundry or tying your shoes, right? There's variation in that process. You can apply this set of tools to lean out or to improve really anything that you do, which is pretty magical. No process is perfect. It's about continuous improvement, right? Not beating ourselves up as we go about our process. Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Thinking about the pebble in the shoe, like if I'm hiking and I, have a pebble in my shoe, it may not seem like a big issue at first when I hit the trail, but by the time I've gotten up to the top of that mountain, man, my bottom of my foot is raw because I didn't stop for a moment and shake this pebble out of my shoe, right? So if you can make a small change today, it's worth doing. Not jumping to improve, I think, is really, really important. Like so often we need answers by yesterday. We want to jump where it's natural. You need a quick solution. And yes, there's quick ideas, there's quick wins. But the two approaches here in this methodology are DMAIC and PDSA or PDCA. You might have seen one or the other. I thank you for the reactions. Love saying that. I love hearing that people say they don't have a process, and there's a great saying, the pebble in the shoe. PESA and DMAIC, these are both essentially saying the same thing. Spend some time understanding your process, planning or defining and measuring, right? Pick some sort of path forward, and then in cyclical iterations, highlight your changes, right? Work towards a better and better state. Don't assume that there's going to be some, home run thing. Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Move forward and find those better and better outcomes over time. Building quality into the process. Now, this one is really near and dear to my heart, right? It's basically, the worst possible thing that we could ever do in our process is when the customer at the very end or the outcome is bad, and we only notice it when somebody sends it back because it's broken or whatever the case is, right? Better than that would be for us to catch it towards the end, right? Which is typically, if we were jumping to solutions, this is the kind of thing we think about. Hey, have somebody QA it right before it goes out the door, right? It's a little better. One step better than that is if each operator in the process can have successive checks, like little checks, right, to go along the way, so that as the process is moving forward, we're capturing it. We don't have to send it back 5 steps. We can capture the defect or the error and then address it. But what's even better than that is making it impossible to fail. Accounting for our humanity, right? Errors happen. That's okay. We're fallible. We're human. So what can we do to account for some of that fallibility to make our processes error-proof where possible, right? Focusing on value-added steps. This is when we think about the steps that are moving the ball forward. We find this when we start to ask why. And why do we do this step? What's the purpose? How does this move the ball forward? Now, if you start to hear we've always done it that way, or that's just the way I was trained, then that's really a good, solid indicator that there's opportunities for improvement there. Okay? So all of this sounds good. And I don't know about everyone in this group, but I hear quite a bit. We don't have time for that. We don't have time to define, measure, analyze. I just need 3 smart people in this room. I need solutions, and I need them out the door by the end of this week, right? I can't give you 5 people to process map and to talk about, the hearts and the flowers of what we do. I just need somebody to look at the Excel sheet, get the data, and just tell me what we need to do to fix this thing, or how many people I need to hire, right? Well, you shouldn't do that, right? In my experience, it was jumping to solutions, and leadership didn't want to hear problem statements. They wanted to hear solutions. So it's hard because you really want to get them to that state where they can see that having this approach, taking the time on the front end, is worthwhile. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to try to maybe change some folks' minds. So if you're in this space now and you're wondering, I don't think this is actually going to work, I don't buy into it, let's take a look at a process, and then maybe let's prove it out mathematically, right? To those of you who are naysayers, still not convinced, still haven't drank the Kool-Aid with us, yeah? First off, let's take a moment and do a thought exercise. Before the whiteboard, let's do a thought exercise. I want everyone to think about a process that you own. So something in your professional world. So take a moment, think about that process. Once you have that process in your mind, I want you to think about what are the documents that you need for that process? How long does it take you to do that process? How many times a week or a year does that process happen? What are the pain points in that process? Now, you probably came to some of these answers fairly quickly. Now think about who's the person just before you in that process flow? Or who's the person just after you in that process flow? What are the documents and the resources that they need? What are their pain points? How often or how frequently do they have to recheck things or send things back? A little murkier, right? Go one more person away from that. The person before that person or the person after that person if you're going the opposite direction. For me, it gets to be a black box. I have some knowledge of what happens right before me and right after me, but you go another layer out or another layer out and no idea. A lot of assumptions, right? And maybe it's the same for you. So I've created a little scribble map that I want to share with everyone here real quick. I recently, well, relatively recently, went through the home buying process, right? As far as I was aware, you apply for a loan, you find some agent, you tour some homes, you make an offer. The offer is either selected or not, and you get your home, right? Hopefully. But it's not that simple, right? There's a lot of other people involved in this, a lot of money to be had, right? There's the agent, the seller's agent, the lender, and I'm sure all the people that support these people. So I had some sense of what the lender's doing, what the agent's doing. I don't know if my agent perhaps has a region. I don't know perhaps if my lender has other people that are helping them with the credit check. I don't know if the seller's agent has somebody who's helping with, doing repairs. There's a lot of things here that go into it that I'm just not that aware of. There's a lot of reasons in this process why my home offer might fall through and not be successful. Wouldn't it be great if I could talk to a seller's agent and go, hey, what do people typically miss? Like they forget to ask about this, or they forget to offer that. What are the things that would make me more attractive as a buyer for this potential home? Because if I fall in love with the house, which I know they say you're not supposed to do, if you fall in love with it, you want to do everything you can. And how can I do that if I don't talk to the people who are doing the process, right, who know this information, right? Let's think about this from a process flow perspective, right? Let's say the lender gets some bright idea and they're going to say, we're going to save 5 minutes in this process for us because we have this form that has to do with the credit check. So we're going to save 5 minutes in our process. Great. If they don't communicate that to me, or if it doesn't go well on my side, or if I miss a step, that might mean that my home application process is delayed, which means that now fewer people like myself actually get their bid into the seller in time, which then means that the seller has fewer people to choose from in terms of showing that to the person who's selling their home. So now the person who's selling their home gets fewer offers, less competitive bids. Everyone loses out. Not only did I not get the home that I wanted, but the person selling the home now is getting less out of the ultimate sort of outcome, right? Because the lender wanted to save 5 minutes in their process, sort of a point efficiency instead of a system efficiency. What about mathematically? I did promise that I would look at this mathematically. So let's say, and don't make fun of me, I made a process map about process mapping. Let me go a little more over here. Am I sharing the screen? I think I'm sharing the yes. Okay, good. I'm like, am I just gesturing to a blank whiteboard screen here? Okay, so this is what happens when people brainstorm. Let's say you've got 30 minutes. Your leadership says, I'm going to give you 30 minutes with 3 analysts or whomever, 3 managers, let's say, and you're going to come up with an idea. That's all that you get, 30 minutes with these 3 people. I want you to come up with some implementation. Great. Typically, when you have 30 minutes, you go, we need to add a QA step at the end, or we need to add a checkbox at the form, or an extra step. Things that make our process less lean, right? So let's say you've added 5 minutes now to your process. So you've added 5 minutes to your process. And let's say you've got 10 staff, and they each do the process 100 times over the course of a year, yeah? So what you've essentially done, I can't control Z, it's not working for me. What you've essentially done is you've added 5,000 minutes plus the cost of 90 minutes to do the brainstorming session. Now you've got new problems you have to deal with because maybe your 5-minute thing has caused other domino effects that you weren't aware of, right? So you're adding another quick fix solution, another 270 minutes. Essentially, this fix has costed you now 5,360 minutes for just this year, compounds over the years, which is 89.33 hours, right? This is what happens when we brainstorm and we jump to a solution. Now, asking for that additional time to do some process mapping, to do some defining and measuring, to do some planning, right? A lot of the times we hear, no, I don't have time for that. I need a solution, I need it that. Well, let me show you mathematically what happens if we were to go the other route and take some time. I need more resources. I need, let's say I need 300 minutes instead of 30 minutes from each of 5 different staff members now. I brought in somebody upstream, somebody downstream, and the 3 people that you recommended to me, and we're gonna do 10 times as much time, right? Not 30 minutes, but 300 minutes times 5 staff to do some define, some measure, some analyze. But this now saves us 5 minutes. So we've now saved 5 minutes in our process, as well as, dealing with whatever the initial pain was. We've saved 5 minutes in our process. We've leaned it out a little bit, which means that we're saving 5,000 minutes. If this process is 10 staff times 100 runs per staff, Now, let's say we spend a little bit of time in control, and after the fact, you shouldn't just plant the flag and call it done. You want to make sure that you do some follow-up, you have some communication, some celebration. So now you pull those 5 staff in for another 60 minutes. So what this means is that you've actually netted 3,200 minutes, which is 53.33 hours saved instead of time added to your process. This is a 5-minute difference. That 5-minute difference equals 142 hours of staff time. So don't tell me that you don't have time to do define and measure and analyze, or to talk about your process, right? Because the cost of doing a quick knee-jerk solution and just throwing something in that you think might work is way more than the front investment, if you will, of time into really understanding the problem that you're trying to tackle and the people that are involved in it and the outcomes of the decisions that you might make. So I hope some of this has resonated, and hope if anyone here has not yet fully drank the Kool-Aid with the rest of us, I hope that you are almost there and that this inspires you a little bit. Enjoy my bunny rabbit while I switch screens. All right. So we are there. 1 second. So you may be asking, how? I'm bought in. Now what do I do? Do I learn a new software? Do I need formal trainings or some expensive class? No. The best thing that you can do is to have an informal conversation with your peers and scribble some notes on a piece of paper. Then you should do that, right? If that's all that you can do that. You don't have to learn a new tool necessarily. Just start writing stuff down, but do it with these concepts in mind, right? The debate and decision, the dialogue instead of a debate approach, right? This approaching it without judgment, approaching it without trying to get people to buy into your idea. Really spend some time understanding the process. So when it comes to mapping, use whatever tools you want, right? If you're comfortable with something like Lucidchart or Visio or ProMap, great, do that. But if you only have comfortability in, let's say, a Word document or something like a Google document with bullets, do that. Because I've talked to so many different areas and they say, we have literally nothing documented. You have nothing documented? Well, you know what then? Anything would be better than that, right? So if you get a crayon and you write it on a napkin, that's still better than having nothing. Scan your napkin and save it somewhere where people can look at it, because that's better than having literally nothing to document your process. And it's scary how often I hear that. No, we don't have anything documented. We just kind of do it. Ugh, it's crazy. There is no best way to do something. There's only better, right? That's the continuous improvement mindset. So if right now you have nothing, then do something better than that. Spend a little bit of time. What can you do today, right? What's the takeaway here? It's about approaching it with a mindset, not a tool set. It's about I want you to think about a process that's unclear for you and reach out to the person who does that process, right? And just listen, just talk to them about what are their steps, what's their day like, not approaching it with wanting to change their minds about a particular thing or telling them that they're wrong about what they're doing, but just taking it in. And if they're open to it, sharing your insights and the things that happen in your day. You can participate in mapping if the tools are available. You can take a look at current documentation if there's SOPs or other documents that exist, right? As you're doing that, think about, does it make sense to you? Are there words that don't quite align with your understanding of the way that they're maybe using the word? Try to identify those cultural misalignments. There's also tons of formal and informal trainings. There's tons of free stuff on the internet. There's things like this conference where you can meet people. Like there's a lot of opportunity to practice this before you go out into the wild. So part of my goal for today was to hopefully inspire you, if you haven't already, to start your continuous improvement journey. Or if you are a practitioner, then to maybe think about whether you are approaching it with these dialogue concepts in mind, whether you're approaching it from an open mindset, whether you're hearing the stories that are being told. Remember that it's a journey, not a destination. Understand what you can about your process before trying to make improvements. Mapping is like telling a story. You shouldn't tell your story without some introspection. But also remember that your story is not yours alone. Right? The stories of your teammates, the departments around you, the faculty, everyone had a role in this organism that we think of as the university. Right? There's a student somewhere sitting in a dorm room, perhaps, completely unaware of the role that you played in their education. And whether you do travel reimbursements or grant funding proposals or updating websites or just scheduling meetings for other people, you are part of their story. So telling our stories helps remove the silos that reinforce our disconnection from our mission, our shared vision. So tell your story and learn from the stories of others. And that's how you reclaim your humanity. That's the end of my prepared remarks. So I open the floor to wild accusations, questions, comments, concerns, considerations, qualms, quandaries, queries, or conundrums that you may have. No, I did so well. Am I just scary? Are we all watching cat videos or enjoying lunch?
Antonio, your home buying diagram may have been the best slide that we're going to see over the next 3 days. So kudos on that one. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anne, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Oh, hi. I'm Anne. I'm from the ANU in Australia. Thank you so much for that. That was really great. I've just got a question about, I really love the tips that you had about how to inspire business to start doing some process mapping and documenting some of those things. I think one of the largest reasons why they don't is because it does seem like a mammoth amount of effort. And also, you know, that processes change all the time, that procedures change all the time. And so that's probably a reason why they don't really want to tackle it in the first place. So I was just wondering if you had some advice or tips about how one might, you know, deal with that, or just to help them get, you know, enabled and help set them up, and then also set them up so that they can actually maintain their processes.
Yeah, so we started a community of practice where we were talking about mapping, and our main goal, I hope nobody minds me saying it in this way, but our goal really was to make mapping sexy, right? Because it's not. People don't look at it and go, I'm gonna map today, this is gonna be awesome. And even when you're doing it, you're like, oh my God, I gotta do mapping again for so long. What I tell people with that is to, before you map anything, think about who are you mapping for and how are they going to use it, right? Because then you really focus in on the function and the audience and the purpose. It aligns really well with this idea of value added. Like, if we're doing this work, does the customer care that we do this work, right? And in terms of keeping it fresh, keep it public, keep it open, and then at somewhere on the map, say if any of this doesn't work, if any of these links are broken, like put accountability to that map, and say this is the person you contact if you have a question about this process, right? And we'll go through and we'll update it. If you have some sort of mapping tool or process or governance where you can say, hey, every 6 months we're going to go through and just spot check these, great. A lot of places don't, or a lot of tools don't, but maps can get stale really, really fast, really, really fast. So the best advice that I can give is, if you make it visible, focus on the ones that are going to move the purpose of the map. One thing that I found helpful is to process landscaping, which if we have time, we can do a landscaping session here and now. But one thing that we can do is to process landscape, is to say, what are all of the things that we do? And then let's organize those into buckets. And then we prioritize, basically, if we use sticky notes, we pick red sticky notes for the processes that are on fire and that need the documentation the most. Because those are the ones where we say, hey, like, yes, we have 50,000 things, it's a mammoth effort. These 5, if we made a map for them, we could either start to process improve, or we could at least communicate and start to, you know, normalize the variation. Hopefully those are helpful. Let's see, so valuable, a couple things in the chat. It was a really good presentation. Thank you, pat my own back. Bringing you back to the customer, great reminder. Any advice on how to effectively play back and share maps to the rest of the teams who maybe weren't involved, and what makes a map less intimidating? Again, it's about thinking through who your audience is and what's going to resonate with them. I'll give you an example. Process maps come in a lot of different forms, right? It might be a video, it might be a Word document, textual guide, it might be images, it might be a mixture of things, it might be boxes with arrows. Those aren't going to resonate the same with every audience. Right? You might have a business analyst who wants to see all the arrows and who can read that big flow chart with all the different spaces, but your frontline staff or maybe your customers, they don't really need all that, nor do they know how to read all of that. So my best advice is to have your intended audience with you as you're creating the map. We did a video, for example. This is a great failure example, right? You want to fail fast. We did this video for self-testing for COVID. The nurses came to us and said, we need something to show students how to do self-administered testing, right? The nose swab. And so we, in lightning speed, we made video. If you've ever made a video, it's such a pain. There's editing and there's timing and there's scripts and there's all stuff. We made it so fast and it came out so good. We were so happy about it. And the nurses were so happy we made it. And you know who hated it? The students that we intended it for. It didn't resonate with them at all. It was too clinical, it was too dry. One of them, I hear tell, took our footage and made a TikTok style video out of it. And it resonated so much better. And it got the message across. Right? And if we had had a customer of ours, any of the students with us, as we were talking about making the video, they might have told us that. And they might have saved us a lot of angst in our approach. So bring the customer along as you're mapping. As the map is being developed and built, show it to them. Show them the sausages is being made. Tell them, hey, are we on the right path in terms of the kinds of links that you need? Is this deep enough in terms of the detail that we're giving, or is this too high level? Have I taken some things for granted because I know the process that maybe aren't as clear to people who don't do this every single day? Other questions? A clap of the hands, a thank you, a thank you. You know what I tell people, by the way, in sessions like this is if you don't answer me when I ask a question, is I will tell dad jokes. I will tell horrible pun jokes. I don't know if they would translate well across the Ethernet sphere to other parts of the world, but I have a whole book, literally, of dad jokes that I punish my classes with whenever they don't respond. So there's my one threat. Anyone else want to ask any questions? Or make any statements? Maybe share a time where you made a map and it resonated really well, because I'm not the expert in this. Like, we all have had experiences. So what are your experiences? I'll put it back to you like a good facilitator would. What are your experiences or nightmare scenarios when thinking about mapping or when thinking about dialoguing?
I think what you said there was very interesting about making process maps that are understandable for the customer and the audience. And I think that's where, as a business analyst, that's where you get a bit of a conflict, because it's like, what do I need from a project point of view so that, you know, the project team can understand what the process is and what we're trying to improve, etc. Versus, does the business care that I've spent a lot of time on my Visio diagram that they can't update because they don't have Visio installed on their computers, and, you know, that's outdated by the time I've completed this enormous map. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things there to think about.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. And that's that cultural piece too. Like, oh, we all know Visio, right? No, just you've been in it so much that you just assume. All right, well, I'll tell you what, I know that some of us are in the lunch time zone. Please feel free to step away if you want to go have lunch before the next session. Thank you all, you've been lovely. I will remain here, as I say, with my ears on, but I will leave you with this. I was watching a tennis match and the ball was going from left to right and it was really boring, but then it got really interesting. The ball started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Could not figure out why. And then it hit me. Yeah, that's my dad joke for the day. Thank you all, you've been lovely. Feel free to use that anytime you like.
Thank you, Antonio.
Bye.